Hello everyone, it's Maha. Welcome back. Welcome back to my channel, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you today, sharing with you what I want to share with you. And I'm sitting here looking outside and it's raining like crazy, and it is Sunday, the 22nd of September. It's one day before the autumn equinox. Tomorrow is autumn equinox as I record this. So blessings to you for the new season. I just love this season. I love this quieter time of the year as we approach the darker season. And I just find this time very, very ideal for going within, for introspection. It's a quieter time, and it's a time that I find as an artist that I get more inspired by nature at this time. I feel like trees speak loudly to me, whereas in the summer I feel like nature is just so busy that it's too busy to talk to me. Whereas in the fall, just before they go to sleep, like especially in November, I find that time so magical and so mystical and spiritual and just very full of inspiration for me. So this video is coming to you hopefully the end of September when I'll post it. It's coming to you also in the spirit of Self-Love September. I thought it would be a good time to honor the goddess Aphrodite. Such an overlooked goddess in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about this, but I've found that compared to some of the other Greek goddesses like Athena and Artemis, who get a lot of voice in the pagan community at large, I find that Aphrodite is often overlooked. And to me, the depth of what she stands for and what this archetype truly represents, like in a really deep level, the subtleties of this archetype are overlooked. She's really known as the goddess of sexuality and love and beauty, and I feel she's sometimes looked at as the vain goddess, the one who's really just, having tons of affairs with all these men, cheating on her husband, being very vain and very into her own beauty and outside appearance. But she is so much more than that. She is very rich, and I just love this book that I've had for a number of years, that I've read over and over, called Goddesses in Every Woman by, I wrote it down so I don't forget, Jean Shinoda Bolen. I just love this book because I love how she gets into really the intricate symbolism of this goddess and this archetype. And she calls this goddess the alchemical goddess. I have a number of quotes here, about 3 quotes that I really want to share with you because they're so beautiful. There were so many little nuggets and parts of this book that I wanted to share with you that I love, but I had to really narrow it down because I don't want to just be reading off different quotes. But as I go through this video, I wanted to explore some of the little facets and just talk about some of my own personal experiences working with this archetype. And then I wanted to share with you something about perfumes, which is actually what inspired me to create this video. So in my previous video, the most recent one that I did, there was a section in there where I was talking about perfumes, and I shared with you a perfume that I made, neroli, which I talked about how it opens the heart. And I was saying how, in case some of you didn't see that, I just want to tell you where the inspiration of this video was born. There was a sentence where I said that when I take in this beautiful aroma or scent perfume, it's like for a moment there is this in-between space where I enter into, and I'm transported into this space where there is no thought. Thought doesn't exist. So then I thought about that, and he gave me the insight about Aphrodite. I kind of connected this perfume, you know, what is this in-between space? And I went back to Jin Shinoda's book to read more about Aphrodite, because I remember that she spoke about this alchemical goddess, Aphrodite, and how there is this sort of transformation that takes place as what she calls Aphrodite consciousness is present. And she describes Aphrodite consciousness, what she terms Aphrodite consciousness, as this focused yet receptive type of energy, where we are both affected and we are taking in the subject. So it's like taking in and being affected creates this new thing, emerges from it, this new experience. It's a very sensory, subjective experience. And it's similar to that moment-to-moment sensory experience. And I find that Perfume, and I will talk about Perfume, I wanted to kind of give a little intro about Aphrodite, talk about her, honor her, and then talk about just a little bit about perfumes and how I connected with that Aphrodite consciousness, because there are ways we can develop or cultivate Aphrodite consciousness. And in the same way as this goddess is the goddess of love, I was thinking that why not then turning that into ourselves and cultivating Aphrodite consciousness for self-love, for self-appreciation. So I want to just read you some paragraphs here. I'm going to start with this one. So, like I said again, she represents so much more than just beauty and love. Here, Jin Shinoda Bolen says, she inspired poetry and persuasive speech and symbolizes the transformative and creative power of love. Whoever or whatever Aphrodite imbues with beauty becomes irresistible. A magnetic attraction results. Chemistry happens between the two, and they desire union above all else. The desire to know and be known is what Aphrodite generates. Beautiful. And if this desire leads to physical intimacy, impregnation and new life may follow. If the union is also or either of the mind, heart, and spirit, new growth occurs in the psychological, emotional, or spiritual spheres. So the example I thought about was taking in the beauty of a flower. And then when you take a rose, for example, and you smell the rose, that's the Aphrodite consciousness. That's the alchemical process that she talks about, where what you take in is also affecting you. It's affected. You are affected by what you're taking in. So there's this experience that emerges. And she gives the example of enjoying like a really fine a glass of wine. I've often thought about my parrot Cheeky. He's just, if you've seen him, he's beautiful. I mean, his feathers, if you could see him in real life, his feathers are so gorgeous. They're all like just different colors. Some of them change color with light. They become red and golden and green. And it's just so fascinating for me to keep staring at him and to observe him, to really take him in. And I remember a long time ago, I told him, as I was just taking pleasure in looking at him, I told him, you're just such a beautiful creature. You're so amazing. You're such a fascinating, beautiful creature. And then I thought another day, it came to me that, how about if in the same way that I'm so engrossed in the beauty of a creature, whatever it is, a bird or even a flower, how about if I could see myself like that? Because really, I don't. I mean, I don't even think of myself as outside of myself. I'm just usually operating within my mind, and the mind, if you are anyone like me, if you are someone who is a perfectionist, that you can have a very critical mind and things, there's always that one thing that's not perfect or not right. And we can be very hard on ourselves. We can be really our own worst enemy. And I think Aphrodite consciousness here, to me, it teaches that self-love, that self-valuing in astrology, Venus, Aphrodite archetype, rules over two signs, Libra and Taurus. And Taurus is that sensual sign, that sign that rules the second house of values, self-esteem, possessions. So if you think about ourselves, valuing ourselves, our self-esteem, how we see ourselves, how we value ourselves, our self-worth, and also how do we appreciate ourselves? How do we show appreciation for ourselves? How do we cultivate these things, which I'll talk about in a moment. Jean Shinoda talks about the relationship dialogue that takes place between the person and the work from which something new emerges. And she gives the example of the act of painting. And I think that's such a great example because as an artist, I know that when I'm engaged in the process of painting, it's like I'm communicating with the art as it is progressing and developing. It's like an alchemical process. Something new is emerging, but I'm stepping back, I'm coming towards the painting, I'm changing things, I'm seeing how the paints react with each other, how are they shifting, how is this whole body of art looking from far away, from close. It's like a relationship, and it's an interaction more than anything. What I would add here that it's not just between the person and the work from which the new thing is emerging. To me, it's also this interaction and communication between the artist and spirit, or source, or consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. It's like you are in communication with the art and also with something else. And that's a very interesting space for me to explore further on, of course, beyond the scope of this video. But I have this little note here on my gratitude and self-love altar, and I've written a little note which says, I love and appreciate you. Love, love, love. I love and appreciate you. This is my mantra, and I say this to Chiki, and I also mirror it to myself. I think that when we have a hard time showing ourselves that self-love, or cultivating that self-love for ourselves, which many of us do, including me, I know that I do, one of the best ways for me was to break that was to give love to something that I love, some being that I love. Like for me, it's my bird, Chiki. It's easier to show that to someone outside of myself than it is to myself. It's like the same with self-compassion. It's always easier to be more compassionate for someone else going through something, but it's harder to be kinder and gentle and have self-compassion for yourself, for those of us who are highly sensitive and empaths especially. So I think that for me, this has been sort of a bridge, giving that appreciating that thing that I love, that being that I love, and then also mirroring it back to me. That's made it easier for me. And I love this image, which is kind of hard for you to see with this camera, but it's from the Goddess Oracle. And I love this image of Aphrodite because to me, it's just that she just really has that glow of Aphrodite consciousness. And I love how she is not represented as this sort of North Americanized figure, but she's more true to her Greek origin, I guess. I love that image, and I have that on my altar as well. Just little simple practices to bring in that Aphrodite archetype. And I'm going to read you another beautiful quote here. Whatever we see in the golden light of Aphrodite consciousness becomes fascinating. A person's face or character, an idea about the universe, or the translucency and shape of a porcelain bowl. Have you ever found yourself just in the glimpse of seeing something beautiful, like little crystal, like a light on the crystal, or a little rainbow somewhere on the table? That's where you know Aphrodite consciousness is at play. She says, anyone who has ever fallen in love with a person, place, or idea, or an object focuses on and takes it in with Aphrodite consciousness. So I think you get the idea here, how we can develop that for ourselves, self-appreciation, falling in love with ourselves, regarding ourselves with this self-valuing the self, appreciating the self. And then lastly, last quote about the alchemical aspect of Aphrodite. We experience the alchemy of Aphrodite when we feel drawn towards another person and fall in love. We feel it when we are touched by her power of transformation and creativity. We know it when we appreciate the capacity we have to make what we focus on beautiful and valued because it is imbued with our love. So in that sense, we can appreciate and we can cultivate the capacity to value ourselves, see ourselves as beautiful, not just on the outside superficially, but really as a beautiful human being who is doing their best to be present and embodied in the world. And then she says, whatever is ordinary and undeveloped is the baser material of everyday life, which can be turned into gold through Aphrodite's creative alchemical influence, in the same way that Pygmalion's statue of Galatea was turned into a real living woman through love. So Pygmalion was the Greek king of Cyrus, Greek mythology, who had built a statue, and then Aphrodite turned that statue into a living woman through love. So Aphrodite's ability to turn stones into a real living human is almost opposite, actually, to Athena, who actually turned people into stone. Not just Medusa, but also Athena. That's interesting, because she talks about how, in the book she goes into detail about how Aphrodite consciousness is subjective. It's not something we do for gaining recognition in the outside world, and it's not something you do for accomplishment. Whereas she describes some of the virgin goddesses like Artemis and Athena are all about more about achieving independence and accomplishments. And then she talks about the other well-known goddesses in Greek mythology, Hera and Demeter, maybe having judgmental attitudes towards Aphrodite for the fact that she is not monogamous and she is not into long-term commitments, so they frown upon that, and that's devaluing this archetype, this Aphrodite archetype in a way. And also what she calls the vulnerable goddesses like Hestia and Persephone, who are more about introspection and not interested in the outside world, the aesthetic sphere where Aphrodite is all about that. She's all about beauty, creating beauty and symmetry. So in the last video, I showed you some little bottles of perfume in different colors. There's a yellow one, here's a purplish one, a red one. I don't know if you can see these, but they're very beautiful, and they're actually small, but they fit quite a bit of perfume in there, liquid or oil. And I said I got these from Amazon. So the reason I showed you these is because this is what inspired the video when I was talking about perfumes. And so one of the ways of cultivating Aphrodite consciousness in life is through sensory experience. So she's the archetype, Aphrodite is the archetype that's most involved in sensory experience, like sensual or sensory experience. So the five senses, the sense of smell is a really strong one. That's a very powerful sense that we have. It's one of the first ones that gets developed when we're babies, because we have to smell our mother. It's very instinctual. And perfumes, of course, also have something very feminine archetype of Aphrodite to them. You know, just the history of perfumes is just very mysterious, just the vessel itself, you know, representing the goddess. Don't break them, please. I'm not going to touch them anymore. The vessel itself, the container, it's a symbol of the goddess as well. It's something we associate with the power of beauty. And it's very alchemical, of course, the different scents blending together, creating something new emerges. So cultivating this sense of here and now focus, this perception of being a keenness of perception and being here and now, that's the quality of Aphrodite consciousness. There are scents, of course, that actually correspond to Aphrodite. In Taurus, Venus, Aphrodite rules roses, so the rose essential oil is ruled by Venus. In Libra, she corresponds to Palma Rosa and Geranium. Those two are ruled by her, they correspond to her. But of course, the whole world of aromatherapy is ruled by Taurus, Venus in Taurus. So you can explore with perfume making. I like to make mine in vodka, but I find that some scents, the deeper scents like frankincense and sandalwood, those ones are just nicer in an oil base. And, you know, experimenting with one scent, getting used to how that feels like for you. What does it create within you? What kind of feelings, emotions, thoughts arise? What patterns arise? What images arise? It's like creating something. You're creating when you're taking in this Aphrodite consciousness. Another way to cultivate Aphrodite consciousness, as she says in the book, is cultivating an interest in art, in poetry, in dance or music. She says the aesthetic sphere. So developing this ability to be completely immersed in a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic experience. To fully immerse in it. So you don't necessarily have to create, you don't necessarily have to make art, although that is an excellent way to also bring it in. The idea is to engage in it intensely enough, or immerse yourself deeply enough so that it creates something inside you, something emerges within you. You are creating a dialogue with that work of art or that piece of music. That dance, you want to maybe take some dances. It's important to provide the opportunity and time to cultivate Aphrodite consciousness and bring that archetype into your life. Then there are obstacles to Aphrodite consciousness. She names them as guilt and shame in the book. Oh, I'm sorry. No, guilt and judgment, but I would like to add guilt, shame, and judgment. Shame is a very toxic energy that we can take on. And these are obstacles to really being in the moment, taking pleasure in whatever it is we're doing. If we're feeling guilty about sex, for example, have certain feelings of guilt, emotion, or shame around that, then it gets in the way of Aphrodite consciousness, because you're not in the moment and you're not taking pleasure in what you are immersed in. You're not engaging in it. So guilt is an obstacle to Aphrodite. That's the goddess Aphrodite's archetype. And judgment is, that's a very interesting one, because when we judge another negatively, we're judging ourselves. It is taking away from our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth. So that idea comes to me where Aphrodite ruling Libra being the sign of relationships and also mirroring the other. So not just relationships as in intimate relationships, but all one-on-one relationships where where you are in a dialogue with someone and something else gets created, like another almost entity between the two people, and that in that engagement with the other. So when we judge another, it's like we're mirroring that back to ourselves. So that is an obstacle to self-love. And so Aphrodite consciousness to me it really links strongly in a powerful way with self-love. And up to this point, I had never really thought about it that way. I never really put the goddess Aphrodite or the Aphrodite archetype as having to do with self-love and valuing the self. So I wanted to make this video also, of course, to kind of work through this myself, understand it myself. And I hope that that helped. I hope that it was something interesting for you, and I hope that you gained from it, because I think one of the biggest challenges for me in the journey of self-love all these years has kind of been, how do I do it? There really isn't any 1, 2, 3 step approach. It's like a journey that we dive into, and we just pick up insights here and there as we go along, and we pace it all together and develop this personal, not definition, but this personal relationship, I guess, with self-love. So now I don't want to ramble too much more. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I hope that if you haven't already, that you would take some time to check out this book, Goddesses in Every Woman. I believe she also has Goddesses in Every Man, which I also loved, and I'm sending you lots of love, and don't forget to love yourselves. Bye everyone, blessings, thank you for being here, thank you for watching.